The grand ballroom of the Rosewood Astoria sparkled under a canopy of crystal chandeliers, the golden glow casting delicate reflections across the towering windows that overlooked Lake Windsor. The scent of freshly brewed espresso mingled with the faint trace of expensive perfume, a luxurious blend that defined the very essence of Newport's elite society. At the center of it all, Juliet Carrington stood frozen. The delicate stem of her champagne glass slipped from her trembling fingers, crashing to the marble floor. The sharp shatter of glass echoed through the ballroom, piercing through the gentle melody of the pianist's rendition of Clair de Lune. And just like that, her world fell apart. Across the room, standing in the grand entranceway, was Nicholas Harrington, her fiancé. But he wasn't alone. His fingers were intertwined with those of Sophia Lancaster, the daughter of a prominent media mogul. And then, with a voice as cold as the winter air beyond the ballroom doors, he declared, "Juliet, I can't marry you. Sophia is my future." For a moment, the world stopped spinning. The whispers began immediately, spreading like wildfire through the sea of silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Gasps, murmurs, stolen glances. The socialites of Newport thrived on scandal, and tonight, Juliet had become the headline. She couldn't move. The silver fabric of her evening gown, once elegant and timeless, now felt suffocating against her skin. The diamond bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Nicholas, felt like a chain rather than a token of love. Her green eyes searched his face, desperately seeking an explanation, a hint of regret. But there was nothing. No hesitation, no apology, as if she had never meant anything to him at all. Juliet had spent weeks preparing for this night. Tonight was meant to be the night she and Nicholas announced their engagement, a grand affair carefully orchestrated to secure their future, not just as husband and wife, but as Newport's next power couple. She had imagined every detail. The champagne toasts, the polite smiles, the admiring glances from the city's most influential families. But never this. Never humiliation. For Juliet Carrington wasn't just another woman in high society. She was the daughter of Preston Carrington, the formidable founder of Carrington Innovations, one of the most dominant forces in the tech world. Her mother, Victoria Carrington, was the mastermind behind the family's pristine image. A woman who knew that power wasn't just about money, it was about control. Nicholas Harrington had been handpicked by her parents. 2 years ago, when he was just a rising entrepreneur with a promising startup in Newport's tech district, the Carringtons had seen potential. And Juliet? She had seen love. "I'll always be there, Jules," Nicholas had whispered over late-night phone calls, his voice warm, convincing. "You're my future." She had believed him. Believed in the man he had pretended to be. But now, as he stood there, his hand locked with Sophia's, his betrayal clear for the world to see, all those promises turned to ashes. Only minutes earlier, the heavy oak doors of the ballroom had swung open, drawing every pair of eyes toward the entrance. Juliet had smiled then, her heart racing, believing Nicholas had finally arrived, late but still hers. That smile had shattered the moment she saw who was by his side. Sophia Lancaster, daughter of Jonathan Lancaster, the powerful venture capitalist who had funded Nicholas's company. The realization hit like a blow to the chest. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't a mistake. This had been planned. And Juliet had been the last to know. The room fell silent, the tension thick enough to suffocate. At the grand entrance of the Rosewood Astoria, Nicholas Harrington stood unapologetic, with Sophia Lancaster by his side. She was draped in a fiery red gown, the silk clinging to her curves like an unspoken declaration of war. Her jet-black hair cascaded down her back, sleek and deliberate, her ruby lips curling into a smirk. And then the whispers began. Like a ripple across Lake Windsor, the murmurs spread, growing louder, feeding off the spectacle. A nearby waiter froze, forgetting to pour champagne, the golden liquid overflowing onto the pristine white tablecloth. Cameras from the press, invited to capture what was meant to be an engagement announcement, began to flash relentlessly. The bursts of light were blinding, but Juliet Carrington couldn't move. Sophia's smirk deepened, while Nicholas simply stared at her, his piercing blue eyes void of emotion. "Juliet, I can't marry you." His voice was flat, as if delivering a business statement, not shattering a life. "Sophia is my future." Juliet's breath caught in her throat, Her hands trembled at her sides, her chest tightening with disbelief, humiliation, and a pain so deep it felt unbearable. "Nicholas, what are you saying?" Her voice was barely a whisper, almost lost beneath the rising hum of the crowd. Nicholas let out a slow breath, as if annoyed that he had to explain himself at all. "Let's be honest, Juliet. You have nothing to offer me." The words hit like a slap. Tears burned her eyes, but she willed them back, refusing to break in front of so many people. "I don't understand," she whispered. "You proposed to me." A humorless smirk twisted his lips. "Did I?" He tilted his head as if mocking her memory. "Or was it just a conversation our families arranged?" Her stomach twisted violently. "I needed the Carrington name to get ahead. But now I have a better option." Sophia laughed softly, stepping closer, linking her arm through Nicholas's. "He means me," she said smoothly, her voice sweet but sharp as a blade. Juliet felt her entire world tilt. This wasn't real. This had to be some kind of cruel, twisted joke. "This is a mistake," she breathed, her voice barely holding together. But when she met Nicholas's steely gaze, any last shred of hope was crushed. "I never loved you, Juliet." The words were like a blade straight to her heart. "You were just a stepping stone. And now, I don't need you anymore." Somewhere in the ballroom, another glass shattered, followed by a sharp gasp from the crowd. The entire room was watching, their eyes drilling into her like a million tiny knives. She could hear the whispers. "Poor thing, how humiliating. Did she really think he loved her? God, this is brutal." And then, the final blow. Sophia tilted her head, pretending sympathy. "You're a nice girl, Juliet," she purred. "But let's be real. You don't belong in Nicholas's world. You never did." Juliet's body went cold. Hundreds of merciless eyes bore into her, tearing her apart piece by piece. But the worst part? She turned to her mother, searching for something. Anything. A defense. A lifeline. But when she met Victoria Carrington's sharp, calculating gaze, she found no comfort, only contempt. "Juliet." Her mother's voice was low but razor-sharp as she stepped closer through the crowd. "You have humiliated us." Juliet's breath hitched. I didn't." "If you can't secure a husband with power and wealth," Victoria cut in, her tone icy and merciless, "then you are no longer my daughter." A final blow. A cut deeper than Nicholas's betrayal. Juliet staggered back, her high heels slipping slightly against the polished floor. And when she turned to her father, Preston Carrington, he simply bowed his head, refusing to meet her eyes. They had already erased her. The crowd parted around her, leaving her standing alone in the center of the grand ballroom, like a bird with broken wings caught in a storm. With nothing left to hold on to, she turned and ran. The moment Juliet stepped out of the Rosewood Astoria, she was swallowed by the icy grip of autumn rain. The city streets of Newport stretched before her, blurred by water streaming down the pavement. She ran, her heels clacking against the wet stone, each step a cruel reminder of her naivety. The rain soaked through her gown, making the silver fabric cling to her like a second skin. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Her mind played the betrayal over and over again. "I never loved you. You don't belong in his world. You are no longer my daughter." Each word etched itself into her bones, replaying like a broken record she couldn't escape. The cold pressed into her, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside her chest. She had lost everything. And the worst part? She had no idea where to go from here. The engagement ring, the one Nicholas had given her 6 months ago, was gone. It had slipped from her trembling fingers, landing on the ballroom floor of the Rosewood Astoria, rolling aimlessly among the shattered champagne glass. She hadn't bothered to pick it up. What was the point? There was nothing left to hold on to. No fiancé, no family, no future. Her heels ached against the wet pavement, the once perfect silver gown clinging to her like a second skin, soaked through from the relentless downpour. Tears blurred her vision, mixing with the rain streaming down her face, but she no longer tried to stop them. She just kept walking. Juliet didn't know how far she had wandered. Past the flickering neon lights of coffee shops, past quiet storefronts now closed for the night. She didn't think, she just moved. And then finally, a glow caught her eye. A bar. The Iron Lantern. Tucked away at the corner of a narrow street, its dim yellow light pierced through the fogged-up glass, a beacon in the storm. Not a place she'd ever stepped foot in under normal circumstances. It was nothing like the upscale lounges of Carrington Tower or the exclusive clubs she had frequented with Nicholas. This was different. Older, rougher, foreign. But she didn't care. She just needed a drink. Something to dull the suffocating pain clawing at her chest. The wooden door creaked as she pushed it open. The smell of aged bourbon and damp oak hit her instantly, mingling with the low hum of conversation and occasional bursts of laughter from a few scattered patrons. Juliet stepped inside, her soaked dress dripping onto the wooden floor, but no one turned to stare. No one whispered. For the first time that night, she wasn't a spectacle. She slid onto a worn leather bar stool, her fingers trembling as she braced herself against the counter. The bartender, an older man with silver-threaded hair, glanced at her but said nothing, his expression unreadable. As if he had seen too many lost souls walk through these doors before. Juliet swallowed hard. "Whiskey," she rasped, her voice raw from tears and the cold night air. "Neat." He raised an eyebrow but didn't question it. A moment later, a glass of amber liquid was placed in front of her. She wrapped her fingers around it, her hands shaking as she brought it to her lips. And then, in one sharp movement, she downed it in a single gulp. The burn seared down her throat, spread through her chest, but she welcomed it. Anything to replace the ache in her heart. She set the glass down and whispered, "Good." The dim bar became a temporary sanctuary, the low lighting blurring the sharp edges of her reality. A second whiskey appeared in front of her. She didn't question it, didn't ask for it, she just drank. What she didn't know was that from the shadowed corner of the bar, a pair of green eyes was watching her. And her story? It was only just beginning. "If you need a husband, I'm right here." The deep voice cut through the haze of the bar, smooth and laced with amusement. Juliet blinked, slowly lifting her gaze toward the source. A man sat at the far end of the bar, one arm draped lazily over the counter, his emerald green eyes glinting with mischief under the dim overhead light. Leo Ashford. She had never seen him before. Ruggedly handsome, dressed in a simple black shirt with the sleeves rolled up, a few strands of dark brown hair falling into his sharp, angular face. Juliet let out a slow, humorless laugh, raising her whiskey glass. "All right, stranger, marry me." The words tumbled from her lips like a reckless dare, half a joke, half something dangerously real. A few patrons chuckled from across the bar, entertained by the exchange. But Leo? He didn't laugh. He just watched her, his head tilting slightly as if studying her. "You're serious?" Juliet exhaled, gripping the whiskey glass a little tighter. Was she? Or was this just the first time in her life she had no one telling her what she could and couldn't do? For 28 years she had lived in the perfect shadow of the Carrington name, at every decision carefully curated by her parents, by Nicholas, by the world that had shaped her. But tonight? Tonight, she had nothing left to lose. The glass trembled in her hands, whiskey sloshing over the rim. She didn't notice. She just wanted to forget. And somehow, in this dimly lit bar, this stranger's absurd proposition felt like an escape. Leo's lips curled into a small knowing smile. "Well, Juliet Carrington," he said, raising his own glass in a mock toast. "That's the most interesting offer I've had all night." Tucked away in a forgotten corner of Newport, where time-worn brick buildings stood resilient against the unrelenting autumn rain, a neon sign flickered above the entrance of a small bar. The Iron Lantern. Its faded, open sign buzzed weakly against the cold night, the glow barely cutting through the damp air. Inside, the warm yellow lighting was dim and uneven, casting long shadows over scratched wooden floors and weathered leather stools. The rain tapped steadily against the large windows, droplets streaking down the fogged glass in a slow, mournful rhythm, as if the city itself were crying in Juliet's place. She sat near the counter, her silver evening gown drenched, its delicate fabric heavy with rainwater. It didn't belong in a place like this. Neither did she. Water dripped from the hem, forming small puddles at her feet, but she made no move to brush it away. The third glass of whiskey in her hand was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. A liquid escape from the nightmare she had left behind. The bartender, an older man with a scruffy silver beard and tired eyes, moved silently. He poured another drink with the precision of a man who had done this for a lifetime, his hands steady despite their slight tremor. He didn't ask questions, didn't pity her. He simply set the glass down and walked away, accustomed to lost souls seeking refuge here, hoping to forget. Juliet kept her gaze lowered, unwilling to meet anyone's eyes. She wasn't ready to face the world outside, a world where Nicholas Harrington had torn her heart apart with a single, careless declaration. "I never loved you." A world where her mother, Victoria Carrington, had erased her in front of a room full of Newport's elite. "If you can't secure a husband with wealth and power, then you are no longer my daughter." Those words echoed in her mind like a cruel melody on repeat, each syllable cutting deeper into the open wound in her chest. And just as the haze of whiskey and sorrow threatened to swallow her whole, a voice broke through it all. "You don't seem like the whiskey type." The words were smooth, tinged with curiosity and amusement, as if testing her reaction. Juliet's fingers tightened around her glass. Slowly, she turned her head, green eyes clouded from liquor and unshed tears, and took in the man sitting a few stools away. Leo Ashford. He leaned back against the bar, casual, at ease, his hands resting comfortably on his thighs, as if he had always belonged there. Juliet had been raised around polished men in tailored suits, men who calculated their every word, every movement, every advantage. Leo was the opposite of them all. He didn't wear a designer suit or a Rolex. Instead, he had on a faded denim jacket over a plain gray t-shirt, slightly wrinkled as if it had just been pulled from the laundry without a second thought. His dark brown hair was messy, damp strands clinging to his forehead, likely from the rain, but he didn't seem to care. Yet despite his unpolished appearance, there was something undeniable about him. It wasn't just the sharp angles of his face or the fact that his presence felt grounded, unshaken. It was his eyes, a deep, arresting emerald green, sharp and focused, holding a quiet intensity that made Juliet feel exposed. He was watching her, not with pity, not with amusement, but with genuine curiosity. And for some reason that unsettled her more than anything. Juliet turned back to her drink. "Maybe I wasn't before." Her voice was rough, from the tears, the cold, and the alcohol burning down her throat. She lifted the glass again, taking another sip. The whiskey seared her throat, hot and unforgiving. She winced, but she didn't stop. People change. Leo tilted his head slightly, studying her like a puzzle he was trying to figure out. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice gentle, unpressured, simply curious. Juliet let out a dry, humorless laugh, the sound cracking from lips parched by cold and liquor. "Worse than rough." She paused, and then, for reasons she couldn't explain, she started talking. Maybe it was the whiskey loosening her tongue. Maybe it was the fact that he didn't know who she was, that he had no idea she was Juliet Carrington, heiress to Carrington Innovations, now discarded like an afterthought. Maybe it was because, for the first time in 28 years, she had nothing left to lose. Juliet didn't hold back. She told him everything. About the engagement party at the Rosewood Astoria. How she had stood there, waiting for Nicholas, believing he was hers, only to watch him walk in hand with Sophia Lancaster, the daughter of Jonathan Lancaster, the ruthless venture capitalist of Newport. She repeated Nicholas's words, cold as a contract negotiation. "Sophia is my future." And how, with a detached smirk, he had admitted he had never loved her. That she had been nothing more than a stepping stone. She spoke of Sophia's mocking smile, of her mother's icy glare, the way Victoria Carrington had disowned her in front of the most powerful families in the city. "You are no longer my daughter." She described the diamond ring she had left behind, rolling among the shards of shattered champagne glass, forgotten like her place in that world. And finally, she told him how the rain had carried her here, to this rundown bar where she now sat, clutching a whiskey glass like a lifeline. Leo didn't interrupt. He didn't nod in sympathy. He didn't murmur meaningless reassurances. He just listened. And strangely, his silence made her feel safe. Something she hadn't felt since the moment Nicholas had walked through the ballroom doors with another woman on his arm. When her voice finally faded, when she had nothing left to spill, when her head drooped forward and her empty glass rolled across the counter, he finally spoke. His voice was calm, easy, but laced with something unreadable. "If you need a husband, I'm right here." Juliet's head snapped up, her blurry vision locking onto his emerald green eyes. For a second, she just stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. And then, out of pure disbelief, she laughed. A real laugh, one tinged with the madness of heartbreak, betrayal, and too much whiskey. "You?" she teased, her lips curling into a wry smile. Her voice wavered, still raw from the burn of alcohol and emotion. "You want to marry me?" Leo didn't hesitate. His lips curled into a slow, confident grin, one that piqued her curiosity rather than her suspicion. "Why not?" he said with a shrug, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "You need a husband. I don't have anything better to do tonight." It was insane, utterly ridiculous. A joke that any sober person would dismiss without a second thought. But in Juliet's mind, fogged with pain, betrayal, and a desperate need for something, anything, to reclaim her sense of control, it made a strange kind of sense. She had lost everything: Nicholas, her family, her reputation, even herself, in the eyes of the world. So why not do something reckless? Why not burn down the last remnants of her old life and step into the unknown? Juliet raised her glass, though it was empty, and nodded. Her voice was firmer than she expected. "All right, stranger, marry me." Leo laughed loudly, the sound deep and warm, filling the quiet bar like a rush of wildfire. It drew glances from the nearby patrons, but neither of them cared. He stood abruptly, slapping a few dollar bills onto the counter, as if he had just made the grandest decision of his life. "Okay, princess," he said, a teasing glint in his eyes. "Let's go." Before she could process what was happening, he grabbed her hand, pulling her off the bar stool. And just like that, they ran. The storm outside had only worsened, the rain now falling in torrents as they dashed out of the iron lantern. Juliet's bare shoulders were instantly drenched, cold droplets pelting her face, soaking her already ruined silver gown until it clung to her like a second skin. Water rushed through the cracks in the pavement, turning the old cobblestone streets of Newport into glistening rivers. Her high heels slipped on the wet ground, nearly sending her sprawling. But before she could fall, Leo's grip tightened, steadying her, and for some reason, she let him lead. "I know a place in East Haven," he shouted over the downpour. His voice was brimming with excitement, like a kid about to pull off the most ridiculous prank of his life. "There's a marriage registry that stays open late." Juliet should have stopped then, should have laughed it off, should have said, "This is ridiculous." But instead, she ran faster. Her feet ached, her lungs burned, but she didn't care. Her hair clung to her face in wild, dripping strands, mascara streaking black trails down her cheeks. But she didn't care. For the first time in her entire life, she wasn't worried about appearances. She wasn't thinking about Nicholas. She wasn't thinking about her family's disappointment. She wasn't thinking about the ruin of her perfect, planned-out future. She was laughing, loudly, freely, recklessly, as the rain fell harder around them, as their soaked footsteps splashed through the city streets, as she let herself believe, just for a moment, that she could start over. Because maybe, just maybe, she already had. Juliet had forgotten what freedom felt like. For years her life had been calculated, polished, structured, every step dictated by expectations. But now, running through the storm, her laughter mingling with Leo's, her pulse racing from whiskey and recklessness, she felt alive. By the time they reached a small, run-down building in East Haven, the fluorescent lights overhead flickered weakly, casting a dull glow on the cracked tile floor. Inside, a tired-looking clerk sat behind an old desk, peering at them through thick glasses. He took in the sight before him: Juliet, drenched in an expensive evening gown, and Leo, in a rain-soaked denim jacket, and sighed. "You two want to register a marriage?" His voice was monotone, as if he had seen too much absurdity to be surprised anymore. "Yep," Leo replied without hesitation, his grin unfaltering. Juliet giggled, leaning against him for support, her breath thick with the scent of whiskey. The clerk slid the forms across the desk, and in their drunken haze they signed their names, the scratch of pens on paper ringing out in the otherwise silent room. Moments later, the clerk rummaged through a dusty drawer and pulled out a small silver band, tossing it onto the desk. "Free gift," he muttered, his voice devoid of enthusiasm. And just like that, 10 minutes later, they were married. Juliet gazed down at the cheap silver ring, its faint gleam catching the dim light, and then she laughed, loudly. "I just married a stranger. Fantastic." Leo laughed too, pulling her toward the door. "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Ashford." And as they stood in the rain, soaked from head to toe, drunk, reckless, and completely insane, Juliet felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Relief. As if for one night she had escaped the weight of the world. The first thing Juliet registered was the pounding in her skull. The second was the eerie sensation that something was very, very wrong. Her eyelids felt heavy, her body aching, as she forced herself to blink against the dim light filtering through a tattered curtain. Her mind struggled to catch up with reality, but the moment she sat up, panic crashed into her. This wasn't her penthouse in Carrington Tower, with its silk sheets and breathtaking views of the city skyline. The bed beneath her was hard, covered in a thin, frayed blanket that smelled faintly of old coffee and damp wood. The walls were painted white, but large patches had peeled away, revealing the rough brick underneath. A single bicycle was propped up in the corner. The floor creaked beneath the weight of her shifting movements. There was no walk-in closet, no chandelier, no luxurious furniture, nothing from the life she had known. Her breath hitched, and then she saw it. The cheap silver ring on her left finger. It gleamed mockingly in the morning light. Juliet froze, her heart hammering in her chest. No, no, no. Slowly, dreading what she would find, she turned her head. And there, sprawled out on a worn armchair, was Leo Ashford. Shirtless. One arm dangled lazily over the edge, his chest rising and falling in deep, steady breaths. Juliet's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a choked gasp. What have I done? Memories from the night before came crashing down like a tidal wave. The bar, the whiskey, Leo's ridiculous joke, the marriage registry, the way the rain had drenched them as they ran through the city. Her stomach twisted as realization slammed into her like a freight train. She was married. To a complete stranger. The room, the small apartment in East Haven, became sharply real. Juliet clutched her head, the headache and sheer panic blurring together into an unsettling mix. What the hell do I do now? A sudden noise from the corner snapped her out of her thoughts. She turned just in time to see Leo stretching, rubbing his eyes with one hand before shifting his gaze toward her. And then, to her complete horror, he grinned. "Morning, wifey." His deep voice was laced with teasing, his green eyes glinting with unapologetic amusement. Juliet stared at him, completely speechless. Leo ran a hand through his already messy hair, making it even more untamed, before casually pulling a gray t-shirt over his head. As if this were the most normal thing in the world. As if she hadn't just woken up, married to him. He strolled toward the tiny kitchen, a space barely big enough for one person, where a rickety gas stove and a few cabinets made up the entire cooking area. With zero urgency, he flicked on the stove and rummaged through the cabinets, pulling out a carton of eggs and what looked like a slightly stale loaf of bread. Juliet watched him, dumbfounded, still unable to process what was happening. Leo seemed completely unbothered, as if this was just another Tuesday morning for him. And somehow, that made it even worse. The scent of frying eggs filled the air. Warm, simple, grounding. It was a stark contrast to the cold rain of the previous night, the storm still lingering in Juliet's bones. She sat stiffly at the small, scratched wooden table, still reeling from the shock of waking up in a stranger's apartment wearing a wedding ring she barely remembered putting on. Leo turned toward her, his easy grin unchanged, completely at ease with the situation. Not a dream, princess. He placed a plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her, the steam curling into the air like an invitation to accept her new reality. Then, with that same teasing confidence, he added, "Welcome to the first day of married life." Juliet stared at him, her mouth slightly open, completely speechless. The warm plate of food sat between them, a quiet offering, a simple gesture, but she could hardly process it. The past 12 hours had upended everything she had ever known. She wasn't Juliet Carrington, society heiress anymore. She was Juliet Ashford, the wife of a stranger. "You're not the Carrington princess anymore, sweetheart." Leo's voice was casual, teasing, but Juliet still felt the weight of the words. She glanced down at the $1 water bottle in her hands, the cheap plastic, foreign and unfamiliar, so different from the $10 imported glass bottles she had once taken for granted. For the first time in her life, she was standing in the middle of a bustling farmer's market, surrounded by vendors calling out their prices, the scent of roasted coffee thick in the air, and the sound of people bartering over fresh seafood and vegetables. Juliet felt completely out of place. And Leo? He was watching her struggle with undisguised amusement. I don't need the reminder, she muttered under her breath, cheeks warming. But as she tightened her grip around the crinkled plastic, she realized something unsettling. She had never actually bought a bottle of water before. Not once in her life. Everything had always been ordered, brought to her, or waiting on a silver tray. Now, she was learning to exist in a world completely unfamiliar to her. A world where her last name carried no weight, where there was no bank account overflowing with wealth, no penthouse with a skyline view, no housekeepers or chauffeurs at her disposal. There was only Leo Ashford, and the simple, unpolished life he lived. Leo's small apartment in East Haven was a world away from the luxury she had once called home. The white walls had peeled in large patches, revealing rough brick underneath, like the worn-out remains of something that had once been whole. The wooden floor creaked beneath every step she took, the sound echoing loudly in the cramped space. There was no penthouse view, no sleek marble countertops, no grand crystal chandeliers. The living room was barely large enough for a single armchair and a scratched wooden table. The tiny kitchen corner had an ancient gas stove, the cabinets worn and chipped, a mismatched collection of mugs and plates stacked inside. Outside the fogged window, the sound of the city's light rail hummed steadily, mingling with the relentless patter of rain. It was a far cry from Carrington Tower. And this was her new life. The first morning after the drunken wedding, Juliet had woken up with a splitting headache and a mind full of regret. What have I done? The question had echoed through her skull as she tried to piece together the insanity of the night before. But then, Leo had placed a simple plate of scrambled eggs and toast in front of her, his lazy smile somehow calming the chaos in her head. "Eat up," he had said, his voice warm, steady, annoyingly reassuring. "Then I'll teach you how to survive here." Juliet had eyed the plain meal with hesitation. No eggs Benedict from an exclusive brunch spot. No croissant served on fine china. Just scrambled eggs, toast, and a man who seemed completely unfazed by the fact that they were now legally bound to each other. She picked up her fork reluctantly, but the moment the eggs touched her tongue, she realized she was hungrier than she thought. Leo watched her, leaning back in his chair, his green eyes bright with something unreadable, a mixture of curiosity and amusement, as if he was waiting to see if she would break or adapt. Juliet didn't know how to exist in this world yet. A world where she had no family to call, no endless safety net of wealth, no status to hide behind. She didn't know who she was anymore. But as she sat in that tiny apartment, eating scrambled eggs off a chipped plate, with a man she had barely met before last night, she knew one thing for certain. Her old life was gone. And whatever came next, she had no choice but to face it. The days that followed were filled with challenges Juliet had never imagined facing. For the first time in 28 years, she was forced to navigate the basics of survival, things she had always taken for granted. Leo, ever amused by her struggles, took it upon himself to teach her. And Juliet hated every second of it. The first lesson? Washing dishes. The sink in Leo's tiny kitchen was barely big enough to fit more than a handful of plates, and the water was freezing, numbing her hands as she clumsily tried to scrub away grease with cheap dish soap. Leo stood beside her, leaning against the counter, watching as she dropped a plate for the third time, this one barely escaping shattering against the floor. "You've never washed dishes before, have you?" His voice was half joking, half serious. Juliet glared at him, her hair a tangled mess, damp strands sticking to her forehead. She didn't answer, because what could she say? "No, Leo, I haven't. I've always had housekeepers to do that for me. I didn't even know where my own dishwasher was until last week." She bit her tongue and focused on not dropping another plate. Her next battle was the laundromat in the basement of the apartment building. The ancient washing machine rattled like it was preparing for takeoff, its loud groaning echoing in the dimly lit room. Juliet stood in front of it, watching in horror as her once flawless silk dress emerged from the cycle wrinkled and lifeless, looking like a crumpled grocery bag. "I hate this machine," she muttered, holding up the ruined dress like it was a casualty of war. Leo chuckled, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "It doesn't hate you," he said, smirking. "You're just not used to it yet." Juliet resisted the urge to throw the dress at his head. Her first grocery run with Leo was an eye-opener. She had always ordered her groceries online, everything delivered in perfectly curated organic boxes from high-end markets. Now, she was standing in the middle of a bustling outdoor market, surrounded by the scent of roasted coffee, fresh seafood, and warm bread. Leo moved through the stalls effortlessly, grabbing produce and inspecting it with practiced ease, while Juliet stood awkwardly, unsure of where to begin. She reached for a $10 bottle of imported water, her instincts kicking in, until Leo plucked it from her hands and replaced it with a $1 plastic version. "You're not the Carrington princess anymore, sweetheart," he said with a teasing smile. Juliet's cheeks burned, a mix of embarrassment and irritation washing over her. But she didn't argue, because he was right. She wasn't Juliet Carrington of Carrington Innovations anymore. She was just Juliet Ashford, a woman learning to live without wealth, without privilege, without everything she once knew. Not everything was a disaster, though. Leo had a way of making her laugh, even when she didn't want to. One evening, determined to reclaim some sense of control, Juliet decided to cook dinner. A simple spaghetti recipe from the internet. But she forgot to stir. By the time she realized, the pasta had burned to a crisp, thick smoke billowing from the pot. She waved her hands frantically, coughing, trying to clear the air. When Leo walked in, took one look at the scene, and burst out laughing. "Planning to burn my place down, princess?" His voice was full of teasing warmth, and instead of getting mad, he simply pulled the pot off the stove and threw open the window. "No big deal. I'll order pizza." Then, as if sensing her frustration, he patted her shoulder, completely unbothered. And to her surprise, she laughed too. A real laugh. One that didn't feel forced or practiced. One that made her feel just a little bit lighter. Another time, as she was walking through the apartment, her heel caught on a loose floorboard. She stumbled, a sharp gasp escaping her lips. But before she could fall, Leo caught her. His arm wrapped around her waist, steady, strong, effortless. For a moment, time stopped. The warmth of his touch seeped through her thin shirt, his steady heartbeat just inches away. His emerald green eyes met hers, something undeniable flickering beneath them. "Careful there, princess," he murmured, his voice lower than usual. And just as quickly as it had happened, he let go. As if it were nothing. As if her heart wasn't still racing. He turned back to fixing an old table lamp, completely unfazed. Juliet stood there, staring at him, wondering if she had just imagined everything. But then, small things started to catch her attention. Strange things. Like the way one morning, as Leo brewed cheap supermarket coffee, he lifted the mug to his lips and inhaled deeply, his expression momentarily shifting into something more refined, more focused. He took a slow sip, closing his eyes, as if he were savoring an expensive espresso from a high-end Italian cafe. Juliet frowned, watching him. Something about the way he tasted the coffee was unusual, too precise, too familiar with the kind of high-quality coffee that wasn't found in this part of the city. "What are you doing?" Leo's eyes flicked open, his expression unreadable. "Just like coffee," he said with a shrug, taking another sip. But Juliet didn't buy it. Because there was something about the way he moved, the way he carried himself, the way he effortlessly understood things that didn't belong in this world. And for the first time since she met him, she started to wonder, who exactly was Leo Ashford? It started with small things. The way Leo spoke about coffee like a connoisseur, the way his posture and presence felt too refined for someone living in a cramped apartment in East Haven. But the moment that changed everything, it happened in the most unexpected way. One afternoon, as they walked past a motorcycle shop in the city, Juliet decided to tease him. If you could have any vehicle in the world, what would it be? She expected something simple. A motorcycle, maybe a car. Instead, Leo answered instantly, without hesitation. A Gulfstream G650. Rolls-Royce BR75 engines. 7,500 nautical miles range. Juliet stopped in her tracks, staring at him. "What?" Leo chuckled lightly, as if realizing too late that he had said something he shouldn't have. He shrugged, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "I like planes." But something in his eyes flickered. Something guarded, something careful. Juliet narrowed her gaze. Who the hell was he? The final confirmation came on a rainy afternoon. Juliet had been rummaging through a drawer, looking for a pen to write down a grocery list, when she froze. Buried beneath old receipts and crumpled papers was a thick stack of crisp $100 bills, at least $5,000. Her breath hitched. Her hands trembled as she carefully picked up the stack, feeling the smooth paper beneath her fingertips. Leo was broke, wasn't he? They lived in a rundown apartment, ate instant noodles and cheap pizza, bought one water instead of imported brands. So where did this money come from? Before she could process it further, footsteps echoed from the bedroom. Leo walked in, still dressed in his usual worn-out jeans and gray t-shirt, hair tousled from a nap. "Looking for something?" he asked, voice casual. Juliet flinched, nearly dropping the money. She turned toward him, her chest tightening, her mind racing. "Where did this come from?" she demanded, holding up the stack of bills. Leo paused. His eyes flicked to the money, then to her. And for the first time since she had met him, the lazy smile vanished from his face. He stepped forward, took the stack from her hands, placed it back in the drawer, and slammed it shut. "I don't like wasting money." His tone was even, but he wouldn't meet her eyes. Juliet's heart pounded against her ribs. "That's not an answer." Leo exhaled slowly, but he still wouldn't look at her. "We live like we're broke, but you've got a pile of cash stashed away?" She stepped closer, her voice rising. "Who are you?" A muscle in Leo's jaw tightened. "Do you have to dig into everything?" His voice had lost its teasing edge, now low and sharp. "I'm your husband. That should be enough." Juliet shook her head, her hands curling into fists. "No, it's not enough." She took another step forward, her frustration boiling over. "Are you a criminal? A con artist? Are you running from something?" Leo didn't respond right away. He just stood there, his hands clenched at his sides. Then, with a sigh, he turned away, walking toward the small balcony overlooking the city streets. Juliet stood in the middle of the apartment, feeling more lost than ever. Who had she married? Her mind swirled with doubts and dark possibilities, but before she could say another word, she heard his footsteps returning. A moment later, she felt something soft draped over her shoulders. A thin blanket. Leo didn't say a word. He simply sat down beside her on the floor, staring out at the rain, lost in thought. Juliet's chest tightened at the quiet gesture. The warmth of the blanket seeped into her skin, easing the coldness creeping inside her. Easing something deeper too. "Thanks." The word left her lips before she could stop it, her voice so soft it was almost drowned out by the rain. Leo didn't reply, just nodded slightly, his green eyes fixed on the city below. Juliet studied his face in the dim light, trying to read the storm that was brewing behind his quiet demeanor. And for the first time, she wondered if she had been wrong about him. The suspicion remained, a dark cloud hovering over her thoughts. But his warmth, his presence, even in the quietest of moments, it planted something small, something unexpected. A spark of trust, a feeling that, maybe, just maybe, she wasn't entirely alone in this new life. Juliet's scream shattered the silence of the cramped apartment, drowning out the steady patter of rain against the window and the distant hum of the city's light rail. The newspaper, a yellowed, crumpled sheet from 3 years ago, landed on the scratched wooden table, right between a plate of dry toast and a half-finished cup of cold coffee. Leo stood across from her, still holding the spoon he had been stirring his coffee with. For a moment his face remained motionless, but in his emerald green eyes a flicker of something flashed. Panic, recognition, before disappearing into unreadable calm. The walls of the tiny apartment suddenly felt like they were closing in, the peeling paint and low ceiling pressing against Juliet's chest, forcing her to confront the truth she had just uncovered. The truth that changed everything. It had all started that morning, at the East Haven market. By now, nearly 2 weeks into their strange new life, Juliet and Leo had settled into an unspoken rhythm, one that felt strangely normal. The market was a world away from the cold, curated perfection of Carrington Tower. And yet, Juliet was starting to feel at home in it. The air was thick with the scent of fresh seafood, the aroma of roasted coffee drifting from nearby vendors, and the warmth of freshly baked bread filling every corner. Bright bouquets of tulips lined the stalls, and baskets of red apples and earthy potatoes sat in neat piles. Juliet never imagined herself here, haggling over vegetables, learning how to choose produce under Leo's effortless guidance. But here she was, and she didn't hate it. Leo pointed toward a stand in the corner. "Those potatoes are cheaper over there." His voice was casual, as always, his weathered denim jacket and scuffed sneakers making him look like any other East Haven local. Juliet held up a rough-skinned potato, grimacing at its uneven texture. "Why don't we just buy frozen ones? It's faster." Leo just chuckled, that lazy, familiar smirk appearing on his face. "Where's the fun in that, princess?" She rolled her eyes but found herself smiling anyway. As they passed a seafood stall, the vendors tossed a fresh salmon between them like a performance, their laughter filling the air. Juliet found herself laughing too, the light, unexpected sound escaping before she could stop it. Leo paused, looking at her, his gaze warmer than usual. "You've got a nice laugh, Juliet." Her cheeks warmed, and she quickly turned away, trying to ignore the strange sense of comfort that settled in her chest. But then, the moment shattered. A voice, sharp, laced with sarcasm, cut through the noise of the market like a blade. Well, look who we have here." Juliet's body stiffened, her fingers tightened around the plastic basket, her knuckles turning white. Slowly she turned, and there he was. Nicholas Harrington, standing in the middle of the crowded walkway, dressed in a tailored gray suit, his blonde hair neatly styled, looking as polished and calculated as ever. Beside him, Sophia Lancaster, her arm looped possessively through his, her black dress hugging her figure, her red lips curling into a smug smile. Juliet's stomach twisted. For a brief second, she felt like she was right back at the Rosewood Astoria, standing in the middle of that grand ballroom, watching Nicholas declare, "Sophia is my future." A bitter, suffocating sensation rose in her throat, but before it could consume her, Leo stepped forward. His hand landed gently on her back, steadying her, anchoring her. "You okay, princess?" he murmured. His tone was light, but there was something different in his posture now. Something protective. Something quietly dangerous. Juliet swallowed hard, forcing herself to breathe. Nicholas had already taken everything from her once. She refused to let him take her peace now. Squaring her shoulders, she lifted her chin and met his gaze head-on. Leo's voice was low but edged with caution. "Friends of yours?" Juliet took a deep breath, forcing her tone to remain steady. "Something like that." Nicholas smirked. That cold, arrogant smile, the one she had once found charming, now made her sick. "I have to say, Juliet," he mused, eyes scanning the old sweater she had borrowed from Leo and the cheap sneakers she had bought from a discount store, "I almost didn't recognize you." His gaze was calculated, sharp, picking apart every detail, every change. No more designer gowns, no more diamonds. Such a pity. Beside him, Sophia giggled softly, her arms wrapped possessively around Nicholas as she let her icy blue eyes drift toward Leo, assessing him like he was beneath her. "And this must be your husband," she purred, tilting her head mockingly. "A real East Haven native, I assume?" Juliet's blood boiled. She took a step forward, her voice firm, unwavering. "He loves me. Unlike you." The words slipped out before she could stop them, but she didn't regret them. For a split second, Nicholas's smile faltered, but then he laughed, a sharp, cruel sound, dripping with mockery. "Love?" He shook his head, grinning. "Oh, Juliet, that's cute, but love doesn't pay the bills." Sophia leaned into Nicholas, her red lips curving. "Let's be real, Juliet," she said smoothly. "What does your husband have besides that ratty jacket?" Juliet clenched her fists, ready to lash out, but Leo spoke first. His voice was smooth but chillingly calm. "I have enough." A small, cryptic smile touched his lips, as if he held a secret neither Nicholas nor Sophia could begin to comprehend. For the first time, Nicholas frowned, his usual confidence flickering just slightly. Sophia scoffed, rolling her eyes. Delusional. But Leo only tilted his head, still smiling, still completely at ease. And Juliet, standing beside him feeling the subtle tension shift, felt a strange jolt in her chest. As if, somehow, this game was about to change in a way Nicholas and Sophia could never anticipate. The encounter ended quickly after that. Nicholas and Sophia turned away, disappearing into the crowded market, Sophia's designer heels clicking sharply against the pavement. Juliet remained rooted in place, her heart pounding. Leo patted her shoulder lightly, his touch brief but grounding. "Don't let them get to you. Come on, we still need coffee." Juliet nodded, but in the back of her mind she couldn't shake the memory of Leo's cryptic smile. It was a question mark she wasn't ready to leave unanswered. It happened on a rainy afternoon, alone in Leo's apartment. He had left earlier, claiming he was helping a friend fix a motorcycle, but Juliet wasn't sure if she believed him. Something about him didn't add up. The way he spoke about coffee with an expert's precision, the way he had instantly named a private jet's exact specifications, the stack of cash in the drawer. Who the hell was he? As rain streamed down the window, Juliet sat in the old armchair, her mind racing. And then she made a decision. A guilty one, but a necessary one. She stood up, walked to the wooden table drawer, the same place where she had once found thousands of dollars in cash. This time, it was empty. Juliet's stomach tightened. Determined, she moved to the small bookshelf, flipping through the worn books stacked haphazardly against the wall. A few cheap novels, a manual on motorcycle repair, and then a yellowed newspaper clipping slipped from between the pages. Juliet's heart pounded as she picked it up, unfolding it carefully. Her breath caught as she read the bold headline, "Ethan Leo Ashford, heir to Ashford Aviation, disappears after financial scandal." A photo beneath the headline showed a man standing in front of a private jet, dressed in an impeccably tailored suit, the same sharp jawline, the same piercing green eyes. Leo, her husband, but not the man she thought she had married. The article detailed Ashford Aviation, a billion-dollar private jet empire, and how Leo Ashford, the sole heir, vanished 3 years ago after his father was accused of embezzling company funds. The world had searched for him, but no one knew where he had gone. Until now. Juliet sank into the chair, her hands shaking. Her mind spun as the realization settled in. Leo wasn't some struggling mechanic from East Haven. He was a billionaire. A man who could probably buy Carrington Innovations if he wanted to. And yet, he had hidden it from her. He had let her believe he was penniless. Why? Her blood surged, a sharp mix of anger and betrayal, and just as she was trying to process it all, the apartment door swung open. Leo walked in, shaking rainwater from his jacket, his usual easy demeanor in place. But the moment his eyes landed on the newspaper in her hands, he stopped cold. Their eyes met. Juliet felt a storm rising inside her. She stood up, gripping the newspaper tight in her fists. And then, with a voice filled with betrayal, disbelief, and fury, she demanded, "Who the hell are you, Leo Ashford?" The door swung open. Leo walked in, his jacket damp from the rain, the faint scent of machine oil and cold wind clinging to him. His hands were streaked with grease, exhaustion lining his face. But the moment he saw Juliet standing in the center of the apartment, gripping a crumpled newspaper with shaking hands, he froze. She took a step forward, eyes blazing, voice sharp with betrayal. "Leo Ashford," she spat, throwing the newspaper onto the table. "Who the hell are you?" The paper landed between them, the bold headline screaming from the page. "Ethan Leo Ashford, heir to Ashford Aviation, disappears after financial scandal." Leo's jaw tightened. His emerald green eyes flicked from the newspaper to her face, and for the first time since she had met him, he looked weary. Not smug, not teasing, not unrateable, just tired. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his rain-damp hair. "Juliet, calm down." His voice was low, steady, but she wasn't having it. "Calm down?" She took another step forward, her chest rising and falling with fury. "You let me believe you were just some broke mechanic living in this dump, when in reality, you're a billionaire?" Her voice cracked, the sheer weight of it crashing down on her. "You lied to me, Leo, or Ethan, or whatever the hell your name is." Leo's gaze darkened, his usual effortless control faltering. "I didn't lie," he said firmly. "I just hid part of the truth." Juliet let out a bitter laugh, tears burning at the edges of her vision. "Part of the truth?" Her hands curled into fists. "You hid an entire aviation empire, an entire life I didn't know existed. Why, Leo? Why would you do that?" Leo hesitated. For the first time, he looked uncertain, like a man caught between two worlds. Finally, he sank into the armchair, his hands clasped together, his voice steady but heavy. "I walked away from Ashford Aviation 3 years ago." Juliet stared at him, her breath shallow. "My father stole from the company, millions. When everything collapsed, he blamed me." His fingers tightened around each other. "The press hounded me. My so-called friends abandoned me. My own family." His throat tightened, but he pushed forward. "I was tired of being nothing more than a walking bank account. I wanted to know if someone could love me for me. Not for my last name, not for money." Juliet's chest ached, but her anger refused to fade. She shook her head, voice trembling. So what? You picked me for some kind of experiment? Leo's head snapped up, eyes sharp. No. For the first time his voice rose, not in anger, but desperation. I didn't pick you, Juliet. I met you that night at the bar, and for the first time in years I felt like I could just exist. You didn't need anything from me. You weren't after wealth or status. You just needed an escape. And I... His voice broke slightly, his grip on the armrest tightening. I wanted to be with you. Juliet felt the first tear slip down her cheek, but she refused to wipe it away. You don't get it, Leo. Her voice wavered, thick with pain. I trusted you. Her chest ached, the memories flashing back in sharp pieces. The nights spent laughing at burnt spaghetti. The mornings where he caught her before she could fall. The moments when she had started to believe she could trust again. I thought you were different. A simple man, no schemes, no deception. Just real. Leo took a step forward, his voice softer now, almost pleading. I didn't lie about my feelings, Juliet. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself not to break down completely. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face, frustration laced in his movements. When I saw you at the market today, standing up for me against Nicholas, I knew. You are the realest person I have ever met. Juliet shook her head, her heart splitting in two. She wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that the moments they had shared were real, but her trust had already been shattered once, and she wasn't sure if she could survive it breaking again. She took a step back, then another. Her fingers curled around the doorknob, gripping it tightly as if it were the only thing holding her upright. Her voice cracked when she spoke. I need time. Then, without another word, she turned and walked out the door. The Seattle rain fell in relentless sheets as Juliet stepped outside, her cheap sneakers instantly soaking through. But she didn't care. She walked, mindlessly, blindly, through the city, past the dimly lit coffee shops, past the neon signs flickering in the night, past the life she thought she had just started to rebuild. By the time she reached Lakeview Park, the wind had picked up, sending icy droplets skating against her skin. The rusted remains of the old gas plant stood silhouetted against the stormy sky, its towering stacks looming like ghosts from another time. She collapsed onto a damp bench, wrapping her arms around herself. What had she done? What was she supposed to do now? She had lost everything once before. Her fiancé, her family, her reputation. And now, the one person who had made her feel like she could start over, had lied to her too. She sucked in a shaky breath, staring out over the dark waters of the lake. She didn't know how to move forward. But she did know one thing. When she left that apartment, she hadn't just walked away from Leo. She had walked away from the last piece of trust she had left to give. The sky stretched endlessly above her, gray and heavy, mirroring the storm raging inside her chest. Juliet sat on a weathered wooden bench, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as rain streamed down her face, mixing with the tears she could no longer hold back. She had walked for hours, past unfamiliar streets, past glowing neon signs and coffee shops bustling with warmth she couldn't bring herself to step into. And now, she sat staring out at the dark waters of the lake, lost in the war between anger and longing. Part of her was furious, betrayed. Nicholas had used her as a stepping stone, tossing her aside the moment she was no longer convenient. And now, Leo had lied to her, let her believe he was just a broke mechanic, when all along, he was the heir to a billion-dollar empire. How was she supposed to trust anyone when every time she let someone in, they proved her wrong? But then there was the other part of her. The part that remembered his warmth. The way he had wrapped a blanket around her during the blackout. How he had laughed at her frustration with the washing machine. How he had stood by her side, unwavering, in front of Nicholas and Sophia. Had she misjudged him? Had his feelings been real? Or had she just been another pawn in a game she didn't know she was playing? The rain kept falling, cold and relentless, but she couldn't move. She couldn't go back to the apartment, not while her trust lay in ruins. But she couldn't walk away, either. Because despite the doubt, despite the pain, something still pulled her back to him. Something that felt a lot like love. Leo stood at the top of the skyline. The city stretched beneath him like a sea of glittering stars. And in his hands, a ring. Not the cheap silver band from that drunken night in Capitol Hill. Not something born from impulse and whiskey, but a dazzling diamond shining as brightly as the beacon at the top of the tower. "I want you to choose me for love," Leo said, his voice steady but trembling at the edges. He knelt before her on the rooftop of the Aurora Tower, the wind tugging at his jacket, the light drizzle catching in his dark hair. "Not because you were drunk, not because of a mistake, but because you love me." His voice was raw, vulnerable in a way Juliet had never heard before, and for the first time she saw it. The fear in his eyes. Because despite his money, his power, his carefully built walls, this was something he couldn't control. Juliet stood there, heart pounding, her breath catching as she gazed at the ring, the city, the man before her. This wasn't her first proposal. Nicholas had knelt before her once in a grand ballroom filled with champagne and whispered congratulations, and yet this felt more real than anything she had ever known. The rooftop of the Aurora Tower was a place she had never visited before, despite spending her entire life in this city. The open-air expanse stretched wide, framed by sleek glass panels, offering an uninterrupted view of the city lights. From the ocean's distant horizon to the mist-covered hills of the east, a light rain fell, tiny droplets rolling down the glass, casting streaks of gold and silver against the night. Soft jazz music floated through the air, the slow, soulful hum of a saxophone blending with the quiet murmur of the city far below. At the center of it all, a single wooden table sat beneath a canopy of lights. White silk napkins, flickering candles, 2 glasses of red wine, untouched. Leo had planned everything, and despite the hurt still lingering in Juliet's chest, she couldn't ignore the truth. She had never wanted to run from someone as much as she wanted to run to him. It had been 7 days since she had walked out of his apartment, rain-soaked and heartbroken. 7 days of cheap motels, of avoiding his calls, of wrestling with the unbearable weight of the truth. She had thought about leaving the city altogether, going back to the cold, suffocating world of Carrington Tower. But every time she tried, she saw him. His easy, teasing smile, the way he watched her when he thought she wasn't looking, the way he had never let her fall, not even once. So when he called that morning, his voice low and urgent, "Meet me at the Aurora Tower, 8 p.m. She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no either. And now, standing before him, with the city beneath their feet and the rain painting the world in silver, she knew that, no matter what she decided, this was the moment that would change everything. "I need to talk to you." Juliet had told herself she wouldn't come. She had spent 7 days trying to convince herself that walking away had been the right choice. And yet, here she was, standing at the top of the Aurora Tower, her heart pounding as Leo rose from his chair. His deep green eyes lit up under the glow of the city lights, but there was something different about him tonight. A tension in his jaw, a hesitation in his posture, a lack of that usual effortless confidence. He wore a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up, and worn jeans, as if still clinging to the simplicity of Leo Carter, rather than the opulence of Ethan Leo Ashford. "Thank you for coming," he said softly, pulling out a chair for her. Juliet hesitated before sitting down, her fingers gripping the edge of the table, her pulse uneven. Before her was a plate of grilled salmon, lemon sauce, and mashed potatoes, but she didn't touch it, didn't even look at it. Her eyes were locked on him, waiting. Leo took a breath, his hands clasped together on the table. "I know you're mad at me," he started, his voice steady but low, "and you have every right to be." His fingers tightened slightly. "I hid the truth about myself, about Ashford Aviation, about the money, everything, but the one thing I don't regret is meeting you that night at the bar. I don't regret marrying you, even if it was reckless, even if it was crazy." He exhaled, his gaze never leaving hers. "I only regret hurting you when you found out the truth." Juliet bit her lip, a storm of emotions rising within her. "You don't understand, Leo," she said, her voice unsteady. "I was betrayed by Nicholas, abandoned by my family. I thought you were real. A simple man. No ulterior motives. And then I find out you're a billionaire. And suddenly, I don't know if what we had was real or just another game." Leo shook his head, his jaw tightening. "It was never a game." His voice was firm now, his fingers gripping the table. "I walked away from Ashford Aviation because I was exhausted. Tired of being seen as a bank account. Tired of people loving me for my money instead of who I actually was." He leaned forward slightly, his eyes locked onto hers, searching for something, anything, behind her guarded expression. "When I met you, you didn't know who I was, and you stayed with me in that rundown apartment even though you didn't have to. That's why I love you, Juliet." His words were like a quiet warmth breaking through the cold walls around her heart. But still she hesitated. "Then why didn't you tell me from the start?" she whispered, almost pleading for an answer she could trust. Leo swallowed hard, his voice dropping, thick with honesty. "Because I was afraid." Her breath caught. "Afraid that if you knew I was Ashford, you'd see me differently. Like Nicholas. Like your family. Like everyone who only ever wanted me for what I had." He exhaled slowly. "I wanted you to love me as Leo Carter, not Ethan Leo Ashford." Juliet stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deceit. She found none. Just a man who had given her a home when she had none. Who had stood beside her when everyone else had walked away. She thought of the way he had laughed when she burned dinner. The way he had caught her every time she stumbled. The way he had sat quietly beside her in the dark that night the power went out. Those moments hadn't been fake. They had been real. More real than anything she had ever had with Nicholas. Leo stood suddenly, stepping in front of her, and then, without hesitation, he dropped to one knee. Juliet's breath hitched. From his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. A sparkling diamond ring caught the light, its brilliance reflecting onto his face. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice remained steady. "I don't want you to have married me because you were drunk." His emerald green eyes held hers, unguarded, open. "I want you to choose me for love. Forget the money. Forget Ashford Aviation. Forget everything else. I'm just Leo. Do you still love me?" Juliet felt tears welling up, but this time they weren't from pain. They were from something deeper, something real. She looked at the ring, then back at him. At the man who had been her safe harbor when she had lost everything. Even if it was just a small, broken-down apartment in East Haven. Her fingers trembled as she reached for his face, her palm brushing against his warm skin. She felt his sharp breath, the way he was barely holding himself together, waiting for her answer. And then, finally, she whispered the only truth that mattered. "I love you, Leo. Not Ashford, not the billionaire, just him." A breath of relief escaped his lips, and for the first time he smiled. Not the lazy smirk, not the teasing grin, but something genuine, something radiant. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and the moment it clicked into place, he pulled her into his arms, holding her as if the world could crumble around them and he wouldn't let go. Above them, the city lights shimmered, the gentle rain falling in silver streaks drenching them both. But neither of them moved, because in that moment nothing else mattered. Not the past, not the lies, not the empire he had walked away from. Just this, just them, together. Juliet rested her head against Leo's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in months, she felt like she was no longer lost. No longer drifting between the wreckage of her past and the uncertainty of her future. She had found her home, not in a place, not in wealth, but in him. In the weeks that followed, life settled into something quiet, something real. Juliet and Leo continued living simply, still in their small East Haven apartment, still walking through the market on weekends, still cooking burnt spaghetti and laughing about it. He never showered her with extravagant gifts, never tried to erase their past with luxury, because money had never been the problem. But while Leo kept his promise that their love wouldn't be built on wealth, he did something she never expected. Without telling her, he reached out to his old contacts from Ashford Aviation. Not for himself. For her. Using his connections, he quietly helped her establish a foundation, Phoenix House, a safe haven for women starting over. Inspired by her own journey, the organization would provide housing, resources, and career support for those who had been abandoned, betrayed, or left with nothing. He never told her what he had done, because he wanted her to discover it on her own. A month later, at a charity gala in Westbridge, Phoenix House officially launched. Juliet stood in the middle of the elegant art gallery, her simple navy dress a quiet contrast to the glittering gowns around her. She was still processing the truth. That Leo had been behind it all. She turned to face him, her green eyes shining with something deeper than gratitude. "You did this for me?" she whispered. Leo smiled, but before he could answer, a voice cut through the air like a dull blade. "Well, look who it is." Juliet turned, and there, standing at the edge of the room, was Nicholas Harrington and Sophia Lancaster. But they were not the same power couple they once were. Nicholas's usually impeccable suit was slightly rumpled, the confidence in his posture forced rather than natural. And Sophia? Her smug expression was strained, a thin veil over something more fragile. Rumors had already begun to circle around them. How Sophia's father's firm had collapsed after a financial scandal, how Nicholas's latest venture had ended in failure. The world they had built had begun to crack, and they knew it. Still, Nicholas forced a smirk. From East Haven to Westbridge, impressive, Juliet. Sophia let out a soft, condescending laugh. Enjoy it while it lasts. Juliet smiled, unshaken. I heard your father's company ran into some trouble, Sophia. That's a shame. Leo stepped forward, resting a calm but deliberate hand on Juliet's shoulder. His voice was smooth but cutting. Business is unpredictable. One wrong move and everything falls apart. Nicholas's smile disappeared, his jaw clenching. Sophia's fingers curled into fists, but she said nothing. They turned and faded into the crowd, their presence dissolving into the backdrop of the evening. Juliet watched them go, then turned back to Leo, a small mischievous smile on her lips. I think I owe Nicholas a thank you. Leo raised an eyebrow. For what? She lifted her chin, her voice steady and sure. For leaving me. Leo's gaze softened, a knowing smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Because if he hadn't, she continued, looking into Leo's deep green eyes, I wouldn't have found you. A few days later, Juliet stepped out of a Phoenix House meeting, having just secured a major donor. She walked through Westbridge Market, feeling lighter than she had in months. But as she reached the exit, she was suddenly met with flashing lights. Paparazzi. Voices shouted over each other. Juliet Sinclair, what do you think about Nicholas Harrington leaving you for Sophia Lancaster? For a moment, she stood still. The old version of her, the one who had once been defined by Nicholas, by her family, by their expectations, would have shrunk under the weight of their words, but not anymore. She took a deep breath, then stepped forward to the microphone. I am not Nicholas Harrington's victim. Her voice rang clear over the market, over the city, over the past that no longer controlled her. I am Juliet Sinclair, and I choose my own future. Without another word, she turned and stepped onto Leo's old motorcycle, where he waited at the market's edge, his lazy smirk already in place. The stunned reporters watched in silence as he revved the engine, and together they disappeared into the night. Because that declaration wasn't just for the world. It was for herself. A vow that she had found her own path, that she was no longer defined by her past. She had risen from it, and she was never looking back. They had faced storms that should have broken them. They had walked through fire and betrayal, through heartbreak and uncertainty. But they had come out the other side stronger together. Leo was no longer a man running from his past, and Juliet was no longer the woman defined by what had been taken from her. Side by side, they had rebuilt, risen from the ashes. After overcoming a tumultuous past, they made a decision. Their pain wouldn't just be something they survived, it would be something they transformed. That was how the Sinclair Ashford Foundation was born. Its mission? To help women who had lost everything, whether due to divorce, financial ruin, or impossible circumstances, giving them the tools to rebuild their lives. They provided scholarships, skills training programs, and temporary housing, offering women the second chance Juliet had once needed herself. Juliet stood at a charity event, her eyes shining with pride as she spoke into the microphone. Our foundation has already helped over 500 women start over, she said, her voice strong and clear. She turned to Leo, who stood beside her, his hand wrapped around hers. He squeezed it gently, his voice warm. You've always been stronger than you realize, Juliet. She looked up at him, feeling the depth of sincerity in his words. So have you, Leo. Her gaze flickered toward the two little ones playing nearby, Emma and Noah, their laughter filling the air like music. Leo watched them, his heart full in a way he never expected. They had chosen a life of meaning over luxury. They hadn't returned to glittering penthouses or hollow high society galas. Instead, they built their home in a quiet neighborhood on the city's outskirts, where a garden bloomed with lavender, where each morning Juliet brewed coffee and listened to the kids' laughter echo through the house. Their life wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it was theirs. That afternoon, they took the children to Lakeview Park, where the entire city stretched before them, the sun setting in hues of orange and gold. Emma and Noah chased each other through the grass, their giggles carrying through the evening air. Juliet turned to Leo, her gaze soft. "Thank you," she whispered, "for staying, for not running away." Leo smiled, his fingers intertwining with hers. "I'm the one who should be thanking you," he murmured, "for believing in me, even when I didn't deserve it." They sat there side by side, looking toward a future free of shadows, free of deception. A future built on trust, resilience, and love. Because in the end, their story had never been about where they started. It was about where they chose to go, together. And that made all the difference. Thank you for following this heartfelt journey. If you believe in love that withstands all trials and in second chances, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Let's continue to spread messages of hope, love, and resilience.